My name is Josh Walker, and Christina Wiesman and I run the American Fort Chamber. We started this business leadership webinar series, was it about a month ago? And basically, it's just right now, it's to provide resources and tools for businesses as they navigate these difficult times for business. And what we have found is that every day is new. It's different with the information that we're having to give out. Right now, businesses are dealing with either finding out that they were or were not financed through the government, and if more finances are going to become available. And so we actually had a conference call this morning discussing that. We had a conference call late Friday evening with the U.S. Chamber, and they're talking about, everybody feels like the government is going to come through with additional funding for businesses, but right now we're in a holding pattern for that. So we will keep everyone updated on that. But in the meantime, we know that we have to continue doing business. And one of the issues that we've discovered as we're trying to do business is the world of the internet. And we've discovered that a lot of businesses aren't quite or weren't prepared or capable of handling the amount of business to do online as they thought, either if you're working from home or you just don't have the bandwidth from your office. And so that's why we wanted to bring in some experts to talk about it. And so I'm going to turn the time over to Scott and Christina, if you guys want to introduce Gabe and talk a little bit about where the conversation is going to head. And then Gabe is, I think, doing the majority of the presentation, or he's got the screen share for the presentation. So yeah. Scott, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Josh. I'll introduce myself. I'm Scott Wiesman with Syringa Networks. I'm a senior account executive, have over 20 years of experience in the telecom industry with various companies. I've got 6 years with Syringa Networks, and just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a brief history of the company and kind of so you can understand maybe some of our knowledge base and where we get our information and so forth. I wanted to just give a quick explanation of who Syringa is and what we do as a company. We were founded in 2001 in Idaho by 12 independent telephone companies. And the reason the company was founded is because these carriers got together and decided if we put our networks together, tied our fiber assets together, it would save us some money because of toll access charges that were being charged by the local exchange carrier, US West at the time. And so they did that. They tied all their networks together and found that they had a pretty tremendous asset once they did that. So they were able to access each other's networks and then also have this asset. So the company carved out a niche early on with providing service to cell companies, to businesses. And one of those, because of the relationships with some of those cell companies, the Sprints, the Verizons, AT&Ts, we were able to win some pretty large awards for service when those companies started to upgrade their networks for 4G. And that actually helped us facilitate network build-outs in other Western states, Utah being one of those. And since 2010, we've put over 1,200 miles of fiber in the ground, probably more than any other carrier from a business perspective in the state. So we've actually been getting our hands dirty and there in the trenches as far as the fiber is concerned. One of the really cool things about the company over the last 5 years, we've really kind of started to expand our reach. We have access into pretty much every major data center, every cloud provider. And in the last couple of years, we've started to expand into an international footprint, which has been really exciting for us. Because originally when we built out our network here along the Wasatch Front, which by the way goes from the Utah-Idaho border all the way down into Utah County. And the thing that we did is we built a carrier grade network that would be sufficient for these cell companies that were utilizing us, fiber to the tower, and then back to their network. And so we had to build a very robust carrier grade network. And it really is a tremendous asset here along the Wasatch Front. We've got multiple companies that utilize our service. It's not just the cell companies and carriers, but we have billion-dollar companies down to cities, education, the state. We've got a lot of different companies that use our service. So I'm going to turn the time over to Gabe Gomez. He is our general manager for Utah and Eastern Idaho. Gabe also has over 20 years experience in the telecom industry. He's been, as far as the Utah network goes, he's built the entire network. He's overseen that project, and he's got as much telecom knowledge as anybody that I know in the industry. He served on the governor's, I've got a board that telecom experts, and he's got a lot of connections and knows the industry very well. So I'll turn the time over to Gabe, and he's got some information as far as during the COVID-19 crisis, some really good information for business.
Thank you, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining today. We're going to be talking about how your connectivity and broadband has been impacted as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic that we're experiencing. We're going to share a slide deck here with you that'll discuss this at large. So let me bring that up here. All right, so hopefully you can see that. So in our agenda, it's really broken down into two parts. We're going to talk about present state in regards some of the trends that we're seeing right now in regards of broadband utilization, both from a wired perspective, which would be like a CenturyLink or a Comcast or Utopia or Syringa Networks. And then we're also going to talk about what the implications have been for wireless networks, such as cell providers, Wi-Fi providers that do this, such as AT&T, Rise Broadband, those sort of folks. And then what implication it's having for their deployments in regards to things like 5G and other types of deployments that we've heard about in the past. Is that slowing down? Is that speeding up? What's it really doing to those sorts of things? And then we're going to talk about some of the implications for specifically for business users, the impacts that stay-at-home broadband is having for specifically large broadband providers that focus primarily on residential markets versus those who only focus on enterprise or business type of markets. And then just a glimpse as to what we feel the future might look like as a result of this changing, this unprecedented event that really we feel is a catalyst for quite a bit of change going forward in regards to a new normal. So getting into some broadband utilization stats. First off, there's really two ways to look at broadband in terms of the way it works. There's downstream, which is you downloading stuff, watching content like Netflix or downloading emails and things like that. And then there's upstream, which is where you're transmitting data out into the internet. Now, from a residential perspective, most internet connectivity is built on heavy download utilization. It's kind of what the residential type providers really focus on quite a bit because, frankly, in terms of someone from their house broadcasting out a lot of information, that hasn't really happened up until now. It's become very evident that that is indeed happening. So on a national level, and what we're looking at, what we can measure are what are called backbone networks. And backbone networks are these things where internet providers connect between different cities, different data centers, and these are these very large trunks that move lots of data between them. Not talking about the distribution side, which is how they go from within the city and then connect out to the various home users or various businesses. So this is strictly looking at from a capacity standpoint, just backbone networks. There is really no data available from any user really in regards what their distribution network looks like in terms of utilization. No one really publishes those types of stats. So from a downstream perspective, which is downloading, It continues to remain flat as it brings out here, but on average, it increased from the time that this broke out. Downloads increased on capacity on backbone routes right about 20%. From a upstream perspective, which is you uploading and transmitting data like you're doing right now, if you're at home on the Zoom session, you're transmitting your video, kind of like what I'm doing or what Scott's doing or what Josh is doing. That has actually began to slow down in terms of its growth. It's had increases over the past couple of weeks. Overall, since this started being measured at the beginning of March, there's been a 34% increase across all carriers that have been measured. Now, fortunately, capacity across backbone networks is generally overbuilt in a lot of respects. And so from a backbone perspective, there's not any real signs of congestion on there. There's still quite a bit of capacity on that. Very different story when it comes to the distribution side. A lot of you may be feeling some pain from your provider in terms of not having the speeds that you need, particularly on the upload side. And it depends on how they've built their networks and the type of technology that they're using to deliver internet access to your home. For instance, GPON and other types of infrastructure, again, generally are generally built for these big download type things, not necessarily for you to be able to upload quite a lot of data. So infrastructure and in terms of how it's architected really matters for that sort of thing. And again, one of the things that we've seen on the backbone side of broadband networks is that there used to be sort of a, for lack of a better term, a curve that towards the evening you'd see residential type usage increase quite a bit. But now we've seen that kind of shifting quite a bit, and actually, to take a term from COVID, a flattening of a curve altogether. We've seen increases in capacity utilization, but overall, when it's being consumed, it's kind of flattened out quite a bit throughout the day. And then also we've seen Wi-Fi providers in particular, such as Rise Broadband and some of those, they're actually having more utilization across their backbones as well as compared to cell type networks like AT&T or Verizon. Those guys have seen quite a bit of a decrease in their utilization on their mobile networks. Here's kind of some graphs here from NTCA that show what has occurred in regard to utilization from consumers. So we kind of see at the very beginning in purple, upstream and downstream in purple as well. That's how much it's gone up, and then we see these incremental adds in regards as time has gone by. So overall, the utilization continues to remain higher than normal when it comes to consumer type of broadband utilization, and we've seen some increases, although it's beginning to level off in regards just how much more bandwidth is being utilized over time. And then as people begin to go back into offices, we'll see this again begin to decrease off of consumer networks. This is again from our friends over at NTCA, and this kind of shows Comcast's backbone utilization leaving the Utah market, or the state of Utah. So again, we've seen an increase in downstream and upstream traffic. We note the dramatic increase in upstream growth right there at 28.1%. And that again is indicative of people working from their homes and transmitting a lot more data than they normally did out from their homes out to whoever their traffic is destined to go to. And again, we see that their network is well built in regards to their backbone utilization. We see that it's still very much able to support what's going on, although we do see it beginning to knock on some pretty high utilization stats, as you see there in green, at 96.1%, and we see some higher traffic utilization as well at nearly 4% utilization too. So we do see some strain on their network, although it's still able to support what's going on, and we see how how traffic is beginning to kind of level off in regards, not adding as much as they used to add. So we see that their backbone is nicely sized for what they're doing. And in regards to wireless utilization, there's a company called Ookla. Some of you all may know who they are if you run speed test servers and things of that nature, they kind of have the market cornered in a lot of ways in regards to that. And so what they went out and measured over this period of time spanning from December 19 to all the way through March is when this data was available. What this is showing is really an increase, a slowdown in regards wired networks, but mobile speeds increasing. And why is that the case? Well, what's going on is that as more people are going home and staying home, the traffic utilization across these cellular networks is going down. And so they have the latency measurements across there are far lower than they used to be because there's just not as much bandwidth being utilized across their network because people are generally staying home. And so we see the shift there as an increase in the usage for wired type networks. So again, wired networks, increasing utilization, wireless networks, as far as like your traditional cellular type companies, T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, those guys, we see their performance getting better because there's less people using that. And that's exactly what AT&T and Verizon Wireless are reporting. They're seeing spikes primarily impacting their wired networks, again, because people are staying home and they're not moving around as much. They have seen an increase, though, in calls. One of the interesting stats from Verizon is they're seeing about 800 million voice calls each week, which is on par with their peak utilization, which occurs on Mother's Day. And then Sprint's reporting a 20% increase in voice and in text messaging by 25%. So we see people utilizing those aspects of their cell phones, but data not so much. The other thing that we're seeing is people staying at home and not going out as much is tower to tower handoffs. As you drive around and you go from one tower to the next tower, those are decreasing dramatically as well because, again, people are staying home. So what are some of the implications for enterprise business users when it comes to this? Well, mostly the impacts are really on distribution networks, as we talked about earlier. Recall there was this backbone side, which is what carries traffic from city to city or from city to data centers. Really, the impact has been largely on distribution networks, which in many cases are undersized. What's going on is you've got these larger pipes being delivered to homes, and they're being squeezed down into a smaller pipe going back to this centralized a router that sits somewhere within the state of Utah for them. And again, what we're seeing is that their backbone capacities are in good shape, but it's the distribution side where people are experiencing quite a bit of pain on that level. Here's a kind of a graphical diagram here of what we're talking about in regards to some capacities on internet traffic. So what you see here is Comcast and CenturyLink and the way their backbone networks are engineered. So most of them are engineered to go from Utah basically to Denver. So most of their traffic goes from here, then it goes to Denver, and then from Denver it goes off into wherever it goes to. And what you see there are the increases in latency across that are measured as you go from your office building in Utah all the way out to an exchange somewhere on the East Coast or the West Coast or the Pacific Northwest. And so those are definitely up compared to where they were before. And that has to do with the traversing across this somewhat congested residential network. And then you hit a backbone, which is actually very fast. So we've seen a measured increase in overall latency across that. So in regards to future implications when it comes to broadband utilization, as a result of what we're looking at, is it's likely that until there's a vaccine or some other event that really minimizes the contagion effects of this virus, that there'll be some sort of hybrid workforce, and we're going to remain in that state for quite some time until there's a way around that. And what we're seeing is more and more enterprises then trying to move things away from their offices and move them again really accelerating the push out into the cloud, making it so that servers and other types of data applications are more readily available for their workforce wherever they may be. And so really trying to increase productivity and performance by doing those sorts of things, and distributing their architecture and infrastructure as far out to the edges as they possibly can by leveraging cloud-based applications. And so that being the case, when we look back at like these larger providers, they're not as heavily peered into as many of these locations as some of these smaller providers are. So what we're predicting at Syringa Networks is that particularly with this distribution and this migration into the cloud, that networks will perform better if they're smaller but better peered into a myriad of different data centers and cloud providers throughout the country, versus these large networks that tend to direct traffic towards one location and then from there begin to distribute it. A lot of these small providers like ourselves have created these networks that have express routes that go to all these different data centers that equate to lower latencies for our customers, because they don't funnel everything to one geographic location. They're actually built to get traffic off of our network as fast as possible and send it out to whichever edge providers traffic is destined to. And then with newer versions of Wi-Fi for Wi-Fi type broadband providers and 5G, we're very much aware of those technologies. And at Syringa Networks, we're not going to bury our head in the sand and say that a 5G is never going to happen or it's going to be too expensive to deploy. The fact is these providers are dumping billions of dollars into this infrastructure. So it's going to be there. It's going to happen. And as a result, we feel that that's going to be a good thing for business users as well as for home users as well, in regards to have more choices for broadband access, and or having redundant options as well. Launching like SD-WAN appliances or something like that that have a wired connection and a wireless connection at the same time, and thereby improving overall performance and uptime for both the small home users as well as small to mid enterprise users as well. It'll be definitely a good technology that'll allow for those sorts of things to happen in conjunction or in replacement of wired type networks. And here's kind of an idea of what we're talking about in regards express routes. So I'm not trying to make this a big commercial for Syringa, but this is kind of how we engineered our network. And there's a lot of other small providers that are really doing the same thing as well. Back in the day, it was quite something to say that you were a tier 1 provider. You had access from coast to coast, and that was the big thing. Well, that's become less and less of a requirement or really a thing as it is. At Syringa Networks, as you can see here by the connectivity diagram on the left, we've launched multiple 100G connections to every data center where we see quite a bit of traffic being dumped or destined to, I should say. So we dump out all your traffic right at those connections versus having to go to these very specific geographic points. And then from there, your router's got to decide which direction it's going to take. So we've engineered these to have multiple connections into each of these routes, taking different paths to these so that we maximize uptime for our users. And at all of these different sites, you'll find AWS, you'll find Azure, you'll find all kinds of different cloud providers. You'll find people that are hosting applications and equipment. And so you've got now express routes that go directly from your enterprise out directly to these guys with lower latency and with a much higher degree of redundancy versus how some of these larger internet providers are engineering their network. And so as a result, earlier we showed that diagram that showed CenturyLink and Comcast. So this is kind of present state on our network right now. So you'll notice that overall latency at the highest point is to get like to the East Coast is quite a bit lower than all of our other competitors were as well. So we see the net result of having this this heavily peered infrastructure versus having this this one large connection that keeps traffic on their network as long as possible before it dumps it out. So we kind of see that as the future, especially as work from home becomes more of a thing, more of a present, more of a future state sort of thing. And this being kind of the infrastructure that can support this kind of hybrid workforce that we're going to see for quite some time. And again, when it comes to 5G and Wi-Fi, these newer versions that are becoming available, they're going to be well suited for, again, for redundancy options for smaller and home users. So as this gets deployed, these are going to be some very viable options for connectivity, other than these congested wired networks that you see in the distribution side, or connecting homes and businesses together. So again, more alternatives coming down the pipe. Really some good technology that we feel will be nice, and that'll be complementary to what would already exist today, and provide more alternatives for users. So kind of in conclusion to what we've discussed here, first off, well, a lot of the data that we're able to gather focuses primarily on these backbone connections. And what we've seen is that most everyone's backbones have been able to absorb the various shifts in traffic and increases in traffic, and they've been doing it well. What we're seeing is this expedited migration towards more and more distribution of networks and applications out into the cloud by various enterprises in order to provide a better experience and more collaboration type options, and increase productivity with workers wherever they may be, and office unit and business units wherever those may be. And then of course we talked about faster wired and wireless connectivity options existing today and on the horizon as well, that will be able to help business users and home users be able to better connect and accomplish what it is that they want to accomplish at that point. So with that, are there any questions that we can field?
Mute myself. There we go. So one of the questions I had, Gabe, is what do you see, how do you see this, the pandemic, changing your industry? You know, obviously we're doing business differently now, but what are some things that are going to probably be a little more permanent as we move forward, both in business and education?
Yeah, so I think going forward, there'll be much more of a hybrid type model, whereas before it was pretty key to have all your employees in one location. I think businesses are going to find out that, hey, we can actually run this hybrid model and potentially reduce real estate costs or operating costs to some degree by doing that. So I think we're going to see more of that hybridization in regards to workforce go on. And to complement that, you will see, we talked about this migration movement to cloud providers out there. You'll see a lot more of that going on for a myriad of reasons. Of course, one of them being security, and that's going to be a thing that really everyone needs to keep their eye out. As you work from home, there's a lot more opportunities for people to get into networks. There's a lot more user error and a lot more things that get lax when people are in the home environment. So we do see a need for heightened IT security procedures and protocols being deployed out there and being really mandated by IT groups towards particularly these work at home type environments.
And as a follow-up to that question, you know, the governor's been pushing for a few years now, especially Lieutenant Governor Cox, to kind of get more work out to the rural areas of Utah. Do you see the networks expanding, you know, trying to get better connectivity out to those rural areas quicker now, or is it more based on demand?
You know, some of that will still be based on demand, but you know, in regards to some of those initiatives, Utah is an extremely well wired state, one of the top wired states in the country in regards access to faster broadband and things of that nature. I mean, obviously, if you don't have it, it's a real pain point and it's a nuisance for you. But by far and large, the independent providers here that largely service these smaller communities have done a really nice job in deploying fiber to the home technologies and doing other things to do that stuff. So as people find out that they can work from home or outsource things to other communities or other areas, certainly the belief is that the infrastructure is there for that. And as the demand increases for that, why certainly the connectivity options will follow that sort of demand. But I don't know that a lot of these broadband providers, such as ourselves, or I know our friends on from direct communication, they don't necessarily gonna build it and they will come sort of infrastructure. They're going to continue to do this likely on a demand basis.
Yeah. One of the things that Christina and I have been talking about, and somebody just posted it again on a local chat room, but it's the 5G myth out there about how 5G is going to make everyone sick. Can you address that a little bit?
5G making everyone sick. Sick in terms of how fast your connectivity is going to be, I think. So, but in terms of actually causing illness or it being related to COVID or anything like that, that's definitely, I mean, I don't think there's any hard medical evidence that proves that. Not that I've seen, at least. I mean, I'd be interested to see if there's some accredited information that actually correlates the two, but I just don't think there's enough 5G deployments out there to say that there's any connection of any sort between some kind of illness and 5G connectivity. If it was more pervasive and there was more 5G connectivity out there, then you can certainly create a better study with more, with a higher population base that's been sick as a result of that. But there's just not enough deployments out there to really make that connection.
And also, I've done a little bit of research on that, and right now they're really, like as Gabe said, there's not any real concrete evidence that 5G deployments are going to be detrimental from a health standpoint. And we've got government regulators that are looking into that. So, if they found evidence that that was the case, that it did cause problems, that's where we have to rely on our government regulation to help with that. But so far, from what I've researched, I don't see that as being an issue right now.
And just to add one more thing to that, I mean, some of the frequencies that 5G is operating on have been in use for quite some time, and they were reclaimed from TV stations and all these different things. So it's not like it's a new frequency that they're transmitting over. So if there were some kind of correlation between illness and what's being transmitted over a certain frequency or whatever or spectrum, I'm sure that would have been connected quite some time ago and hopefully stopped, I would imagine. But there's no concrete evidence today about that.
We've been involved with Utah Ignite and the smart cities. They're talking a lot about the technologies that are being created. Do you feel like this is kind of a hand-in-hand partnership where a lot of the technology being created now is reliant on the broadband capabilities out there?
Absolutely. I mean, the next wave of things to come is definitely Internet of Things, which smart cities and Ignite and all those things, the infrastructure that they're pushing is going to be able to support. So broadband and especially like with this pandemic and so many more people working from home and things like that, it's really proven out that the internet infrastructure out there is such that it could support quite a bit more in terms of connected appliances and devices and different things like that. So their initiatives probably will be a nice complement to what's already been engineered and architected when it comes to broadband networks. On the backbone side, the distribution side, in regards to how homes are connected and what technologies are being used for that, that's a little more suspect, as many people are feeling the pain of not having a good upload speeds and things of that nature. Those are still things that will need to be addressed by certain providers that have elected to follow certain paths in regards to their architecture and their subscription rates and how many people they'll allow per connection and things of that nature. So that's that part of it is still there's still quite a bit of work that needs to happen on there. But that's, I think, where complementary type networks like 5G and other faster Wi-Fi type networks that are coming on board will nicely complement those sorts of things to where being kind of a quasi free market economy, I think those will kind of push wired networks along to where they'll be able to support what these networks are going to do as well.
So do you recommend, there's a lot of topic, especially in American Fork, I know you're aware, of discussion, should a city invest more in infrastructure like that? Should it be private? Should it be a private, public partnership? What's the future course of, helping the internet be more available to everybody?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. I would say it kind of depends on quite a few factors, but with so many different technology options coming down the pipe in regards, things like 5G, things like this faster Wi-Fi protocol that's coming out, and what already exists today, and then taking a look at just how well wired Utah is as well. It's a tough case to make that investment today to wire up a city. I think and again, I'll have to say this is tainted from a service provider standpoint, but the issues that we experience in regards getting broadband out to the masses have more to do with like regulations from cities in regards permitting, or the time it takes to cross certain infrastructure like canals and railroads and all these different things. Those sorts of things make it somewhat cost prohibitive for us to continue to deploy fiber networks. And so my thought, it would be better if cities found ways, kind of like what UDOT's done, to make infrastructure available to providers, to make it easier for them then to deploy networks out into communities, into different areas, versus them getting into the game themselves and providing it. It's as a service provider trying to run a network that is extremely high quality, extremely high access, and with all the redundancies and all the bells and whistles built into it to ensure that consumers are able to connect to the internet. I can tell you, it's not an inexpensive venture. It's fairly expensive if you're going to do it right. So there's ongoing costs as well that need to be considered, and things of that nature that make it so that it could be a tough proposition without having a really high take rate from consumers. So while it's good that communities are looking into ways to solve that problem, from a service provider perspective, it might be better to cities might be better served at looking at ways to accelerate the deployment of broadband by providing infrastructure for carriers to go in there. And then at that point, things like prices and things of that nature that some of these broadband deployments are seeking to lower at times might go away, because the cost basis for service providers to get into cities and to get into communities might be lowered as well. And so that certainly is something that could be shared with the residents or business users within communities.
Gotcha. Well, as you know, we partner with the Business Resource Center at UVU and the Small Business Development Center to do these calls. Peter J is actually on the call now. He's the president of the Business Resource Center. And I just wanted him to hop on real quick. He started the Internet of Things for Utah several years ago, and he runs Utah Ignite. Pete, are you there? Peter J.
Yeah,
there
sorry.
he is.
Turn my video on. Okay, yeah, I'm here now.
Great.
Yeah, I started Utah Internet of Things meetup group. So if you type in Utah Internet of Things into Google, the meetup groups will be the first thing that comes up. And we started that just to find out what was happening in Utah. There's a bunch of siloed people and organizations working on IoT products. We ended up bringing the community together. We put about $2 million or $3 million of state of Utah funding into the Internet of Things industry in Utah as grants to probably about 20, 30 companies or projects. And then as that evolved, we got the Chambers of Commerce connected with a national organization called US Ignite, which focuses on smart cities. And we decided that was the next step, was bringing the IoT and the cities together. to build smart cities. And so we've got those communities all kind of together now, but we still have to make some things happen with them. So I also run the Business Resource Center, like Josh said, and we work with a lot of small businesses. And it's at Utah Valley University. I'm the director there, and during the epidemic, we've been helping with consulting. We have small business development center counselors that give free consulting to businesses that need help, and it's always been free. It's state funded, government funded, so that to help the small business community. And it has MBAs and experienced business consultants doing the free consulting. So, but we're still involved in smart cities and Internet of Things. UVU is very interested in smart cities. They're talking about putting quite a bit of money into smart cities programming at Utah Valley University. I don't know how the epidemic has affected that. They're telling us all to look at our budgets right now, so see how long this thing lasts. But yeah, we're still involved.
Can you talk about how you partner with companies like Syringa to help get information out to the business community?
Yeah, I mean, for the smart city community and the business community that are involved in smart cities are interested in that. I mean, we brought the community together. So I mean, you can sponsor events, you can speak at events once we're open again. I mean, some of these webinars get a few people on them and some don't get as much. So anything that is relevant to Syringa that the business community could use with broadband connections and dark fiber, redundant fiber, there's ways we can push it out to the IoT community and the business community that we're connected to. So we'll send this video out to our community as well. Anyway.
Sure, we'd be delighted to help in any way that we can. I mean, smart cities and things of that nature with, when you couple that with IoT, that's going to be really powerful. Looking towards the future in regards, different events like this pandemic and, earthquakes and things like that. And, the notification type of infrastructure that could be set up so much better than what it is today. We're definitely interested in supporting you guys' initiatives however we can.
Does Syringa have any broadband going into universities right now in Utah? University of UVU?
I don't think we're in UVU, but in basically from Salt Lake County north, we have dark fiber into every higher ed facility in Utah. So like the Hughes Data Center, the Eccles Broadcast Center, Salt Lake Community College, Weber State, Logan University, Utah State University. We connect all those with dark fiber, and then we also have some broadband connectivity into those as well.
And for the basic layman, Gabe and Peter, you both mentioned dark fiber. When I first heard that, I thought it was a Star Wars term. Can you guys tell that a little bit more, explain that? Yeah,
so dark fiber is just basically building a custom fiber network between two endpoints, in which the consumer of the dark fiber can then put on their own hardware at the end of it and do whatever they want to do with it. For instance, when we did the undertaking with UEN to connect the Hughes Data Center to USU, a lot of it was done for for higher research, for more bandwidth for increased research type activities, such as weather forecasting and things of that nature. So they wanted a way to do that where they weren't limited by a certain level of connectivity, like a gig or a 10 gig. Now what they can do is they can put multiple systems across there and create their own whatever type bandwidth that they require on that. And so at Syringa Networks, when we deploy that, we maintain the dark fiber path. So if there has to be a road move or it gets cut, we go out there and we fix that for them, and they just continue to operate their own hardware at the end of it.
And is there a max? Is there a cap to what kind of processing or data I can use, download?
Dark, yeah, there is, and that's going to be governed by the type of equipment that you put at the end of it. So as that improves, then your level of bandwidth can improve as well. So it just at that point it becomes up to you whatever you want to put across that. Now dark fiber is generally used for like higher ed type institutions, government, hospitals, carriers like Verizon or AT&T trying to connect a bunch of towers together. So from a consumer level, not really something that's super useful that way. But from someone who has lots and lots of bandwidth and doesn't want to cap on it, because they've got so many unforeseen type things that they want to run across, that makes a lot of sense for them.
Okay.
Gabe,
Well, we
can
have
you talk for a minute about, so, we're talking about how COVID-19 has affected, internet connectivity. Can you talk a little bit about the earthquakes that we've been having, how that affects maybe infrastructure, or what, providers have had to do to prepare or adapt to that, and what, even consumers maybe can do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fortunately, I didn't know of a lot of providers that were super adversely impacted, like lines were cut or anything like that. Mostly what happened is providers that didn't have solid power infrastructure in place, with this longer power outage that occurred in the western side of the valley in Magna, in those areas where, for instance, that's where our central office is. There were some reported outages that were connected with service providers not having the right type of power redundancy option, generators, batteries, etc., those sorts of things to continue to provide the amount of uptime. Fortunately, we've kind of overbuilt our power plant, but even us, we were looking into, at this point, we have a single generator powering our entire building when something like that happens. So we're now in the process of augmenting, adding a redundant generator that sits in parallel with our present one, and making sure that we have some mobile generators that can go out to our various repeater sites as well. So from a service provider standpoint, that's and even someone who has this infrastructure that requires uptime, that's really the biggest area that they really want to focus on, is making sure that their power plant, that sort of infrastructure is up to par. And then looking into multiple providers, not just having a single provider, and then taking a look at what paths those providers take to get into your facility, especially if you're heavily reliant on connectivity like a hospital or some kind of a critical care type function in those types of events. Just making sure that those sorts of things are in order, having redundancy wherever possible is what would really be the big recommendation there.
Well, I will say my kids thought it was the end of the world when our power went out for a few hours a couple weeks ago. So the internet has definitely become not just it's a necessity now. And just to do business, to communicate, where 20 years ago it was this new novel thing, and now you have to have it in order to be able to do. In fact, look at the school districts. We would not be able to do school right now if we didn't have good connectivity.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't be able to do business calls like this. I mean, we'd all be back in the dark ages, I suppose, just wondering what to do next. So obviously the internet has made the world a smaller place, but we're more connected now than we ever have been. And I think the technology is coming out. Several people have put out the question, is broadband going to be the old vehicle, and the new and shiny thing is going to come out in 10 or 20 years, and broadband's the old way? And can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's highly likely. It's hard to tell what the future really holds in regards to how we're going to connect, 10, 15, 20 years from now. I would expect that there'd be something sleeker, better than the way we're providing broadband today. What that is, I have no idea. But things will continue to evolve. Things will continue to change based off needs. Certainly, what Peter's doing with the smart cities and IoT, that's going to be a major driver in the way broadband is delivered from end to end, because now you're going to be dealing with so many different endpoints that are transmitting or receiving data in some way. That's going to require all sorts of different infrastructure within core networks and edge networks to be able to sustain and support that level of connectivity and that kind of constant chatter that's going to occur as a result of those sorts of things. And then there's going to be other applications that today we can't see. You think in terms of like 4 or 5 years ago, try to host a a Zoom session like this, that just wouldn't have happened, right? So in terms of being able to run the protocols that support this type of streaming and then distributing it, all this stuff has changed, has evolved, continued to evolve. And so the internet, broadband, the way it's delivered, what it is, in the future, it's going to be, it'll be different for sure than what we see today. It's not, this is definitely not future state for sure.
Gotcha. Well, I don't know if we have any other questions. Christina, Scott, you have any other comments?
Nope, I don't.
Okay, well, we appreciate everyone. Normally on these, when we have a speaker come in and present, we give them a gift. So Scott, we're going to let Christina give you a gift of some sort.
I'm making one.
That's right. and then we'll make sure, Gabe, that we get you something when everyone's back to work. And
we're happy to support the business community any way we can. So no gift necessary.
Yeah, but we do appreciate Syringa being involved, being willing to present today. We know that you sponsored when Utah Ignite did the lunch with Spencer Cox, and he was speaking, that you guys were the sponsors of that. So we know you're heavily involved in the tech community, and we appreciate you coming on today. As for other chamber things, we do have our next call is on Thursday at noon. And this one is more of a call of hope and just to forget a little bit about the crazy world that we're in. So we have Nathan Osmond is going to be hopping on. He's going to be doing a live concert on Zoom. And so we're actually sending that invite out to all across the state to hop on and just enjoy some music and just talk about uplifting things and, forget about Corona for an hour. So once again, thank you very much. Peter, thanks for being on the call, Scott and Gabe. And we look forward to seeing you guys again later.
Our pleasure. Great to meet you, Peter.
Thanks. Good to meet you too.
Thank you.